Hey everybody, welcome to chapter 2. I've read some annotations already and I think that you're on to some really good things here. You're noticing the right kinds of stuff and you're noticing, what may prove to be important in of my cement. So let's take a look at chapter 2. I'm going to do a read aloud. I'm also going to model how a thoughtful reader annotates in the text as they go. Chapter 2. The bunkhouse was a long rectangular building. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In 3 walls, there were small square windows, and in the 4th, a solid door with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks. This is my attempt at making bunks. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Aren't bunks like this? Oh, geez. This is the worst drawing ever. Sorry, everybody. That's supposed to be bunk beds. Maybe I'll try again later. 5 of them made up with blankets, and the other 3 showing their burlap ticking. Over each bunk there was nailed an apple box with the opening forward, so it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupants. At least that looks a little bit more like a box. And these shelves were loaded with little articles, soap and talcum powder, razors, and those Western magazines ranch men love to read and scoff at and secretly believe. And there were medicines on the shelves and little vials, combs, and from nails on the box size a few neckties. Near one wall there was a black cast iron stove, its stovepipe going straight up through the ceiling. In the middle of the room stood a big square table littered with playing cards, and around it were grouped boxes for the players to sit on. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw, that's a cool personification, a bright dust-laden bar through one of the side windows, and in and out of the beam flies shot like rushing stars. Okay, so I know I talked to you a little bit about parallel scenes. This reminds me of the opening of chapter 1 because it's so detailed. It looks like John Steinbeck pays such acute attention to this bunkhouse, and it looks a lot cooler than this, where these men are living while they are working on this farm. I'm going to try to draw a little stove where they keep the fire, and it goes all the way up. It's absolutely terrible. Anyway, and I like that there's little accoutrement or little items, knickknacks that these men are keeping with them, and you can see that they don't have a lot. And that makes sense if they're traveling around, right? They don't have a lot to bring with them. They just have enough to fill up a little apple box or apple crate. You know, like a crate that a bunch of apples would be if you turn it sideways and stick it on the wall. So this seems to be like a parallel idea. Or a parallel technique, maybe more so. And here's the action. The wooden latch raised. The door opened and a tall, stoop-shouldered old man came in. He was dressed in blue jeans and he carried a big push broom in his left hand. Behind him came George, and behind George, Lenny. "The boss was expecting you last night," the old man said. "He was sore as hell when you wasn't here to go out this morning." He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a round stick-like wrist, but no hand. "You have them 2 beds there," he said, indicating 2 bunks near the stove. George stepped over and threw his blankets down on a burlap sack of straw that was a mattress. He looked into his box shelf and then picked a small yellow can from it. "Say, what the hell's this?" "I don't know," said the old man. "Says positively kills lice, roaches, and other scourges. What the hell kind of bed you giving us anyways? We don't want no pants rabbits." That's funny. Pants rabbits are probably bugs that crawl around in your pants and bite you while you're sleeping. Gross. Bed bugs or something. But I do see that word rabbit again. Okay. The old swamper shifted his broom and held it between his elbow and his side while he held out his hand for the can. He studied the label carefully. "Tell you what," he said finally. "Last guy that had this bed was a blacksmith. Hell of a nice fella and as clean a guy as you want to meet. Used to wash his hands even after he ate." "Then how come he got graybacks?" George was working a slow anger. Lenny put on his bindle on the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with open mouth. I gotta look up graybacks. What is a grayback? Oh, it's a lice. Oops, that's not it. Fenrir grayback. What is that? Whoops, grayback slice. That's not exactly what I was talking about. Sorry, folks. Grayback lice. Ew, I have a feeling this is going to work. Right? So he's afraid of getting lice. I said bugs, but he said lice. Okay, enough of that. Okay, then how can we get Gray back? So George was working up a slow anger. Lenny put his bindle on the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with open mouth. Tell you what, said the old swamper, this here blacksmith, name of Whitey, was the kind of guy that would put that stuff around here even if there wasn't no bugs, just to make sure, see? Tell you what he used to do. At meals, he'd peel his boiled potatoes and he'd take out every little spot, no matter what kind, before he'd eat it. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was, clean. Used to dress up Sundays even when he wasn't going no place, put on a necktie even, and then set in the bunkhouse. Set means sit, the way he's using it. I ain't so sure, said George skeptically. What do you say he quit for? The old man put the yellow can in his pocket and rubbed his bristly white whiskers with his knuckles. Why, he just quit, the way a guy will. Says it was the food. Just wanted to move. Didn't give no other reason but the food. Just says, give me my time one night, the way any guy would. George lifted his tick and looked underneath it. He leaned over and inspected the sacking closely. Immediately, Lenny got up and did the same with his bed. Remember this? This is parallel too, right? The time when Lenny looked over to George and watched him draw in his knees and pull his hat down, he's doing the same thing. So he has to watch for cues. He unrolled his bindle and put things on the shelf, his razor and bar soap, his comb and pill bottles, bottle of pills, his liniment and leather wristband. Then he made his bed up neatly with blankets. The old man said, I guess the boss will be out here in a minute. He was sure burned when you wasn't here this morning. Come right in, and when we was eating breakfast says, where the hell's them new men? And he gave the stable buck hell, too. George patted a wrinkle out of his bed and sat down. Gave the stable buck hell? Sure. You see, the stable buck's an N, and I'm going to talk to you guys about the N word and the history of this word in another video. And when we read and we encounter words like this in our literature, we have to stop and think about context and why it was said and when it was said. And you can tell if this is taking place in the late 30s in the United States, of course that was a word that would be used freely. And not even used as an insult, but more of a descriptor, if that makes any sense. I'll talk more about that. But as I read aloud, I'm not going to say the word because of the weight that it has for me. And I would ask that you do the same if you're writing about it or you're going to be speaking anything. I don't know if we do any kind of videos later. But I'll be sharing a little bit more about the N word. Okay, sure. You see, the stable buck's an N. N, huh? Yeah, nice fella too. Got a crooked back when a horse kicked him. The boss gives him hell when he's mad. But the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot. Got books in his room. What kind of guy's the boss? George asked. Well, he's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what, know what he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, drink hearty, boys. Christmas comes but once a year. The hell he did? Whole gallon? Yes, sir. Jesus, we had fun. They let the end come in that night. Little skinner named Smitty took after the end done pretty good, too. The guys wouldn't let him use his feet, so the end got him. If he could have used his feet, Smitty said he would have killed the end. The guys said on account of the end's got a crooked back, Smitty can't use his feet. He paused in relish of the memory. After that, the guys went into Soledad and raised hell. I didn't go in there. I ain't got the poop no more. And I think by poop he means energy. It seems like they were using the stable buck as someone to fight with, which shows you what their... I'm sorry, can't find this. Where am I? There I am. They used him to beat on him. So the stable hand would be the man whose job it was to work with the horses, and it seems like they make him live out in the stable, and they obviously treat him terribly. And this was like part of their fun. Their nightly fun of drinking would be to bring somebody in that they could beat up. Ugh, I don't even like talking about that. Okay, Lenny was just finishing making his bed. The wooden latch raised again and the door opened. A little stocky man stood in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt on each side of a square steel buckle. On his head was a soiled brown Stetson hat, and he wore high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man, or he didn't work. The old swamper looked quickly at him and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. "Them guys just come," he said, and shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped in the room with the short, quick steps of a fat-legged man. "I wrote to Murray and Reddy I wanted 2 men this morning. You got your work slips?" George reached into his pocket and produced the slips and handed them to the boss. "It wasn't Murray and Reddy's fault. It says right here on the slip that you was to be here for work this morning." George looked down at his feet. "Bus driver gave us a bum steer," he said, or bad directions. "We had to walk 10 miles. Says we was here when we wasn't. We couldn't get no rides this morning." The boss squinted his eyes. "Well, I had to send out the grain team short 2 buckers. Won't do any good to go out now till after dinner." He pulled his time book out of his pocket and opened it where a pencil was stuck between the leaves. George scowled meaningfully at Lenny, and Lenny nodded to show that he understood. The boss licked his pencil. "What's your name?" "George Milton." "And what's yours?" George said. His name's Lenny Small, so look, George is answering for him. The names were entered in the book. "Let's see, this is the 20th, noon the 20th, he closed the book. "Where you boys been working?" "Up around Weed," said George. "You too?" to Lenny. "Yeah, him too," said George. The boss pointed a playful finger at Lenny. "He ain't much of a talker, is he?" "No, he ain't, but he's sure a hell of a good worker, strong as a bull." Lenny smiled to himself. "Strong as a bull," he repeated. George scowled at him, and Lenny dropped his head in shame at having forgotten. The boss said suddenly, "Listen, Small." Lenny raised his head. "What can you do?" In a panic, Lenny looked at George for help. "He can do anything you tell him," said George. "He's a good skinner. He can wrestle grain bags, drive a cultivator. He can do anything. Just give him a try." The boss turned over on George. "Then why don't you let him answer? What you trying to put over?" And what this means is, like, what are you trying to, like, is this a scam? Like, what scam are you running? So it's as you guys say, it's pretty sus. Like, why are you here with this guy and you're doing all the talking? George broke in loudly. "Oh, I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But I'll say he's a goddamn good worker. He can put up 400 pounds bail." The boss deliberately put the little book in his pocket. He hooked his thumbs in his belt. This is the second time he's done that. He puts his thumbs in his belt buckle. And I have a really clear image of what that cowboy guy looks like with his hands in his belt. And I guess that's a cowboy accent. I don't know what's wrong with me. And squinted, one eye nearly closed. "Say, what you selling?" "Huh?" I said, "What stake you got in this guy? You taking his pay away from him?" "No, of course they ain't. Why you think I'm selling him out?" "Well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I'd just like to know what your interest is." Something about that line, I would say this is one of those quotes that seem important. I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. George said, "He's my cousin. I told his old lady I'd take care of him. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's all right, just ain't bright, but he can do anything you tell him." The boss turned half away. "Well, God knows he don't need any brains to buck barley bags. But don't you try putting nothing over, Milton. I got my eye on you." "Why'd you quit in Weed?" "Job was done," said George promptly. "What kind of job?" "We was digging a cesspool." "All right, but don't try to put nothing over, because you can't get away with nothing. I seen wise guys before. Go on out with the grain teams after dinner. They're picking up barley at the threshing machine. Go out with Slim's team." "Slim?" "Yeah, big, tall Skinner. You'll see him at dinner." He turned abruptly and went to the door, but before he went out, he turned and looked for a long moment at these men. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. George tells us there's like a reason why he's cousins, because they're related, and that he's mentally, intellectually limited because he was kicked by a horse in the head. Okay, but the boss seems a little bit suspicious of the whole deal, and I don't blame him. I don't blame him. Two adults traveling, and it seems like these men travel alone for the most part. Up here at the beginning of the chapter, the old man who was talking to him, the old rancher, kind of talked about one guy just getting up and leaving, as guys do. Just the way a guy would, the way any guy would. So it seems strange that these two are traveling together. And he says, well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I just like so much interested in. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit more, and then I'm going to, let you continue and do this type of thing yourself. Where I was. Okay. When the sound of his footsteps had died away, George turned on Lenny. Oh, one more thing. All these, farmhand jobs, you should look up. Google it. What's a skinner? What's a bucker? Right, you're bucking barley. What's barley? If you don't know what barley is, you can look that up. Maybe you've never even heard of barley. Okay, so when the sounds of his footsteps had died away, George turned on Lenny. So you wasn't going to say a word. You was going to leave your big flapper shut and leave me do the talking. Damn near lost us the job. Lenny stared hopelessly at his hands. I forgot, George. Yeah, you forgot. You always forget. And I got to talk you out of it. He sat down heavily on the bunk. Now he's got his eye on us. That's the second time he says that. Now we got to be careful and not make no slips. You keep your big flapper shut after this. He fell morosely silent. George, what do you want now? I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse, was I, George? Be a damn good thing if you was, George said viciously. Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble. You said I was your cousin, George. Well, that was a lie, and I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself. He stopped suddenly, listening to the open front door, and peered out. Say, what the hell are you doing listening? So George lies for his friend. So the intellectual limits are not a result of an injury, and he's not related. So this mystery of why they're together still has not been solved. NYST. It's hard to talk and spell at the same time. Say, what the hell are you doing listening? The old man came slowly into the room. He had a broom in his hand, and at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray of muzzle, and with pale, blind, old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room, laid down, grunting softly to himself and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he was settled. I wasn't listening. I was just standing in the shade, a minute, scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping out the house. He's like the cleaner. You was poking your big ears into our business, George said. I don't like nobody to get nosy. The old man looked uneasily from George to Lenny and back and said, I just come there, he said. I didn't hear nothing you guys was saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. A guy on a ranch don't ever listen, nor he don't ask no questions. That seems really important too. Seems like a statement of purpose right there. Damn right he don't, said George, slightly mollified. Not if he wants to stay working long. But he was reassured by the swamper's defense. Come on in and sit down a minute, he said. That's a hell of an old dog. I must pay attention to that dog, right? He's old. He's drag-footed. He's got a gray muzzle. He's blind. He's lame, and his feet don't work right. Aww. And he's licking his little moth-eaten coat. So his dog is in rough shape. Old and in rough shape. Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger. He stood his broom against the wall, and he rubbed his white bristled cheeks with his knuckles. How you like the boss, he asked. Pretty good, seems all right. He's a nice fella, the swamper agreed. You got to take him right. At that moment, a young man came into the house. A thin young man with a brown face, with brown eyes and a head of tightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his left hand. And like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. See my old man? He asked. The swamper said, He was just here a minute ago, Curly. Went over to the cookhouse, I think. I'll try to catch him, said Curly. His eyes passed over the new men, and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows, and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious. So when you see words like these and you don't know them, definitely look them up, especially when they're describing a character that you've never met before. So we're meeting this new person, and we need to know what calculating and pugnacious means, so I want you to look those up. Lenny squirmed under the look and shifted his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. "You the new guys the old man was waiting for?" "We just come in," said George. "Let the big guy talk." All right, he seems... That's pretty rude. Lenny twisted with embarrassment. George said, "Suppose he don't want to talk." Curly lashed his body around. That means he, flew around. "By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoke to. What the hell are you getting into it for?" "We travel together," said George coldly. "Oh, so it's that way." George was tense and motionless. "Yeah, it's that way." Lenny was looking helplessly to George for instruction. "And you won't let the big guy talk, is that?" "He can talk if he wants to tell you anything." He nodded slightly to Lenny. It's like he's giving him permission. Okay, so what I'm seeing right now is this Curly guy. He's different than the old man who we just saw, and he's different than the boss that we just saw, who happens to be his father. So he's the boss's son. And there seems to be, trouble brewing in him. Is he a troublemaker? I don't know yet. But he's, all up in Lenny and Curly's business, and he's rude, right? By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoke to. What the hell are you get, right? He's super rude. I don't know. I don't like his vibes, if you know what I'm talking about. "We just come in," said Lenny softly. Curly stared levelly at him. "Well, next time you answer when you're spoke to." He turned toward the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent out a little. George watched him go, and he turned back to the swamper. "Say, what the hell's he got on his shoulder? Lenny didn't do nothing to him." I just lost my space, I'm sorry. The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. "That's the boss's son," he said quietly. "Curly's pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight, and he's handy. So, not only is he, jumpy, he was a former boxer." "Well, let him be handy," said George. "You don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny?" "Well, tell you what. Curly's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at them because he ain't a big guy. You seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy." All right, so here's some awesome characterization. So Curly has what we call this a Napoleon complex. Have you ever heard of that? So Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't a dictator of France, but he was the emperor of France, thank you. And he is famous for leading France into many different wars and making, one time, France really great, and then he lost a lot of wars too. But he was a very short man, and he was known for wanting to fight with just about everybody. So someone who's small like this, who wants to pick fights with big guys just for being big guys, we can say they have a Napoleon complex. And this Curly seems like that kind of guy. So it seemed like I was right before. Let's see how much longer we got. Just a little bit. I'm just going to read a little bit more with you, and then you guys go ahead, because I think you can follow it once I read like this and talk with you. "Sure," said George. "I seen plenty tough little guys, but this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny." "Well, Curly's pretty handy," the swamper said skeptically. "Never did seem right to me. S'pose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is. And s'pose he does the same thing and gets licked. Then everybody says the big guy ought to pick someone his own size, and maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance." Right? So it's like he has the odds in his favor. He's rigging the game, so to say. All right. Rig the game. George was watching the door. He said ominously, and ominous means like with a warning? "Well, he better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick, and Lenny don't know no rules." He walked to the square table and sat down on the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down on another box. "Don't tell Curly I said none of this." He'd slough me. He don't give a damn. Won't ever get canned because his old man's the boss. So we all know people like that, right? Because they're related to the people they work for, they can get away with everything. George cut the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one and throwing it down on a pile. He said, "This guy Curly sounds like a son of a bitch to me. I don't like mean little guys." "Seems to me he's worse lately," said the swamper. "He got married a couple of weeks ago. Wife lives over in the boss's house. Seems like Curly is cockier than ever since he got married." George grunted. "Maybe he's showing off for his wife." The swamper warmed to his gossip. "You seen that glove on his left hand?" "Yeah, I seen it." "Well, that's full of gloves, full of Vaseline." "Vaseline? What the hell for?" "Well, I tell ya. Curly said he's keeping that hand soft for his wife." And that's gross. Right? Some gross gossip talk, which is, gossip usually has some element of truth, right? George studied the cards absorbedly. "That's a dirty thing to tell around," he said. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. So thus far in Chapter 2, we met the bunkhouse. It's not really a character. Where these men are going to live while they are working. So it's absolutely not like a summer camp, but the camp house was like, Greenkill bunks where you had bunks lined up, and that's where the men would stay while the work was there. They're migrant workers. So when the work was done and the plants were all grown and harvested and packed away, the work was over, so they would have to get up and leave and go somewhere else. So the bunkhouse is where they're going to live, and this is obviously part of the setting. We met the boss. Okay, and he seems, I guess he seems tough to me. But he almost seems fair. Like, he doesn't yell at the men too much for being so late. And he wants to know if George is taking Lenny's money, which, I don't know. I think it demonstrates that he's a fair man, and I think he's right to be suspicious of them. I don't think he's obnoxious. The old swamper we've met. Okay, and he doesn't seem to be able enough to work out on the fields. So he cleans up. He's got this ragged dog. My dog is sitting right on top of me as I'm talking to you guys. And he seems to almost be like a historian. Right? He knows the history of the place. He can tell who was living there before. He talks about who the boss is, who Curly is, what's Curly's deal. And we've met Curly. Okay, he seems to have a temper. He's a former fighter. And I wonder if you can take the fight out of a fighter. And he wears a glove to keep his precious hand nice and soft. And he picks fights with big guys. Well, it seems like he picks fights with everybody. All right, so your job, I'd like you to continue to read Chapter 2 today. You can annotate just like I'm doing in here. And I will post some more. Look at all the work we did. Okay, hope you guys are well. And that ends this. Maybe I'll end it on my beautiful bunk drawing. Bunk. Okay, bye guys.